I'm starting to feel like Bart in The Simpsons when his classmates tell him to go on and say the line. Like most of the cast, Baiken's defense modifier value has been decreased, thus decreasing the damage she takes. Previously, she took 114 from this sequence. And now, she takes 106, so a fairly standard change to her modifier value. Baiken's dash had some adjustments to how it interacts with her movement speed overall. Previously, she would pretty much accelerate over the course of the dash, while starting off fairly slow. This meant that for her dash blocking game, she would move a little bit of distance as opposed to a great deal. As you can see here, this is about after 4 dashes. Now, her dash is faster initially and accelerates a little less than it did before. This means that for her dash blocking game, she should be able to close a little more distance against the opponent while maintaining good defense. We're substantially closer after 4 dashes to the opponent now than before. While this will subtly improve her neutral game, it will also potentially open up some new combo links for her that require dashes that weren't able to work before. So we'll see about the further implications of this change as we try to explore more of the character. Her 6P sees 2 nerfs in this patch. They've increased the recovery of it, which is pretty standard for many 6Ps in this patch, while also slightly shrunk the lower hitbox, so this move should not be able to beat out as many low-profile moves as it used to before. We'll go ahead and compare the recoveries of the 2 versions of the move now. Again, this should mean that it's more viable for the opponent to whiff punish Baiken for missing a 6P in neutral. The knockback on Far Slash has been decreased, making it more likely for her Heavy Slash to be able to connect afterwards. At close to max range, Heavy Slash would pretty much whiff consistently, and if a Baiken player buffered it, they were asking to be whiff punished. For the current patch, it is still possible to have this normal whiff, but the number of situations in which this should happen should be slightly reduced for Baiken. Baiken's Heavy Slash has its blowback adjusted in 2 ways. Previously, against a grounded opponent, it would just push them back. But near the corner, you could get a wall bounce against an airborne opponent. In the current patch, it will now launch the grounded opponent with a ground bounce. This is pretty useful, actually, since it basically means that Baiken's able to get launches into Kabari using this normal. However, in the corner now, it no longer wall bounces. However, I feel like this isn't too big of a deal, as it just means the move is going to behave consistently for Baiken at all points now. The fact that Heavy Slash is now a consistent launcher for Baiken means that she's able to get some higher damaging combo routes without the requirement to use 2 Heavy Slash as a launcher. So, as my boy Ganian of the FGC will show you right here, this is something that she can do pretty consistently now. Honestly, a well-deserved buff. 2 Heavy Slash also has less horizontal blowback to it, meaning that Baiken should be able to maintain her offense a little easier if she ends combos with it, or, more practically speaking, should be able to get some new combo extensions that weren't possible before. As you can see in the previous example, this 5K whiffed for a couple of reasons. The 2 reasons were that Baiken's 2 Heavy Slash had increased horizontal blowback before, so the enemy was a little farther away. That, combined with her slower dash initial speed, meant that she wasn't able to really pick up after that sequence at that timing. With those 2 changes, to her dash and to her 2 Heavy Slash, she's now able to link a 5K in that scenario. This is just to simply demonstrate what's going to be more optimal for the character is something I'm going to leave for Baiken mains to explore. Again, another well-deserved buff for the character. 6 Heavy Slash has a couple of buffs to its damage and to its blowback. Previously, it did 39 damage, and on a grounded hit, it wouldn't do anything to the opponent except push them back. Against an airborne opponent, you get a ground bounce, but not something that was really workable to link into a normal of any kind. You could definitely link some special moves, though. In the current patch now, it does 10 more damage, doing a total of 49, and launches the opponent with a ground bounce. As you can see, even on a normal hit like this, she's able to link tether, something that was only possible if she did this after some sort of Roman cancel launcher. This again is another great buff for Baiken to give her access to some of her kit without requiring as many resources as it did before. Jump Dust had its damage increased. Before, it did 39 damage. The buff damage is 48 now, so an increase of about 9 damage, something that Baiken appreciates a bit. She namely uses this in her corner combo route, so having a little more meat to them when she uses this for a wall bounce is appreciated. The slash version of Kabari, which ties the tether to the opponent, has an increased vacuum effect. Previously, at a distance of her close slash, far slash, and heavy slash block string, it would pull the opponent close enough for a far slash to connect. This is the new vacuum effect. From the same sequence, Baiken is now close enough to go for a close slash, which should operate much better as a frame trap that leads to more scary mix-ups for the character as well. Again, another great buff. Just to maybe more finely illustrate the situation now. She has access to that overhead now in this situation, which is pretty scary, but arguably deserved for the character after how unfunctional she's been for a while. Youzansen has a buff that, if I remember correctly, is actually a reversion of some nerfs. The later halves of the active frames will now vacuum the opponent towards Baiken. Previously, and if I remember right, this was a nerf to Baiken. If you use this to cross up, the opponent was launched away from Baiken. This basically meant that she required resources in order to get a pickup here. Now if you cross up the opponent, the vacuum effect pulls them close enough for Baiken to get a close slash pickup. I think this was how the move used to work before Arc System Works decided to nerf this aspect of Baiken's character. And honestly, I think considering the other crazy mix-ups the characters have, this is more than fair for the character to have back in her arsenal again. Now time for the change that I'm sure everybody knows about Baiken at this point, and that comes to her counter, Hiragi. Previously, with the nerfs to the reversal mechanics in a Guilty Gear Strive as part of a balance of system mechanic changes, this move really got the short end of the stick, as losing the ability for it to RC basically ruined many OSs that Baiken had on defense. Before, she was able to use this and in the recovery frames of it be able to keep herself safe. Thus, if the opponent tried to bait this out, Baiken could still remain safe. Without that functionality, the move was basically way worse than any sort of DP within the game because it was basically a reversal option that lost it to some delayed pressure as well as lost a throw, whereas other DPs now were able to beat throws. Arc System Works decided that it's time to buff this move in a couple of interesting ways that will surely frustrate many players. Baiken can now perform Hiragi out of block stun. Let's go ahead and talk about this because from the surface level, this seems like a completely broken mechanic for Baiken to have, but it's actually pretty risky for her to do still. For starters, the effective window for the parry to actually work is still very tight, and so if the opponent delays their offense in any sort of way, Baiken can get blown up for this. Or if you mistime the Hiragi parry, you will be eating a counter hit. For example, I did Hiragi too soon in that block string sequence right there, and Asuka was able to blow me up for it. So this isn't necessarily a complete get-out-of-jail-free option. You have to know your timings of the opponent's offense in order to successfully use Hiragi in this way. You might have noticed as well that when we did this in the block string, the opponent wasn't automatically countered to take damage. Instead, they were put into a guard crush state that Baiken is able to have advantage out of, meaning she's able to steal her turn. Additionally, from this state, as well as from farther ranges, she's able to cancel from this style of parry into a dash. So this means that at farther ranges, she's able to close the gap and run her offense more successfully for using Hiragi at farther ranges. Again, another nice quality of life buff to this move to give it more purpose than just a point-blank anti-meaty style of move. I think the best situation for Hiragi to see some use is going to be against some sequences where there's guaranteed multiple hits coming out from the opponent that they aren't able to cancel out of. But these are also very few and far between, as there's not many normals in Guilty Gear Strive that have multi-hit properties to them. And even then, in some situations, depending on the properties of that multi-hitting move, Hiragi is actually not very effective. Some people were speculating that Bedman would basically have a difficult time actually being able to use some of his common set play against Baiken because his jump heavy slash was multiple hits. So you might be thinking, well then Baiken can just get a guaranteed Hiragi here. However, the input for Hiragi is quarter circle forward punch, which means you have to hold down. The second you start holding down to buffer this move through, Baiken goes into crouch and you get opened up by this overhead. So it's actually not feasible to use against this particular trick unless you're doing Hiragi preemptively to beat it. Once you block a move like that, you're basically stuck holding it. I hope in that short bit of time I've been able to demonstrate the pros and cons of using Hiragi like this. For a move that definitely had everybody up in a blaze on any kind of social media, claiming that Baiken was going to be the next broken thing, once you get down and actually analyze it, it's actually not too crazy of an option that requires precise timing from the Baiken player in order to be successful with it. I feel like this is going to be the hallmark of a great Baiken player, someone who knows what timings that they have to do to get a Hiragi to deal with the opponent's auto-time pressure. And again, it's going to make the opponent try and think twice about using some of their auto-timed offense against Baiken. So there's a lot of back and forth that definitely falls within the spirit that Arc System Works has claimed they had for this patch, which is to increase the number of interactions. And again, because Hiragi just leads to Baiken being able to take her turn back, doesn't necessarily mean that she's also going to get guaranteed damage on you. Just simply means she's able to steal her turn in situations that other characters couldn't do so before without using resources. I think this is a pretty cool buff for Baiken to get with this current functionality of it. It certainly had potential to be way overtuned and broken, but I don't think that's the case against it, as it's pretty weak against stagger pressure and can open Baiken up to taking a lot of damage. It's a hard read through and through, but one that makes the opponent have to think twice about how they run their offense. The last change to Baiken is to Kenjyu, which was 2 bug fixes. There'd be certain situations where the number of hits would increase, and there was an issue where the duration would change under certain conditions. To my knowledge, the first of those changes, the number of hits being unintentionally different, actually didn't get fixed like they listed to in this patch. It is something that the team has acknowledged in their announcement of various bugs that they're going to be addressing in a patch that's happening in November. So hopefully this will actually be a bug fix implemented into the game for Baiken. Just letting you all know that despite what it says, the Super still has this bug going on. Overall, I think it's a great patch for Baiken. She definitely has a lot more functionality in her kit that doesn't rely on certain conditions being met. She feels like she's able to achieve her game plan more effectively on her own without requiring resources like Roman cancels or tethers in order to get that far. Some of these buffs, I think, are reverts, but I think they are reversions that were necessary for the character to be a lot more fun and potentially viable for tournament play. Anyone who says that Hiragi is broken is pretty much not understanding how the move actually works and hasn't put the 2 seconds of lab time into it to see just how balanced this option for her actually is. Don't get me wrong, it is going to be strong when it's successful, but it does put the Baiken player at risk to use in some cases, and if they're the kind of player that wants to flip that coin, well, they can be my guest as it is. I feel like Baiken's going to be very much within the same sort of power scale this patch, but instead of feeling like she's a half-baked character that has to jump through so many hoops just to function, she should feel like she's able to get to her core game plan a lot more consistently and successfully on her own accord, which should make her hopefully a little more enjoyable for the player base to celebrate. I know that the player base for Baiken was pretty much in shock that the only change she received leading into Season 4 was a nerf to Hiragi that fell in line with system mechanics, so it's good to see Arc System Works come into Season 4 and say, yeah, this character does need some help, so we're going to try and give it to her to make her a little more viable and strong of a character. And I think that's great for her overall. I hope my boy Ganyan is doing well enjoying these changes.